In a palace of painted lips and golden robes, she walked unnoticed. Her name was Meilin, not the daughter of a noble family, nor the favorite of any powerful man. She belonged to no one. She had no title, no beauty that could be used as currency, no charm to entertain those who ruled. Meilin lived on the edge of things, in quiet corners, in narrow hallways where candlelight never reached fully. Her work was simple: copying old scrolls in the Imperial Archive, binding records no one read, organizing the past while the future moved quickly without her. She was neither ugly nor striking, just plain. A girl with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers. Her skin was soft but pale from too much time indoors, her posture careful from a lifetime of trying not to be in anyone's way. She tied her dark hair back with a single piece of faded green cloth. That was the only color she ever wore. In the court of emperors and concubines, she was invisible. And she preferred it that way. The archives became her home. While others sought favor, Meilin sought silence. She didn't wish to climb higher. She didn't wish to be seen. In a place where beauty opened doors, her presence closed none, because it was never noticed at all. Still, she watched everything. She watched as new officials arrived wearing silk too bright for their wisdom. She watched young concubines laugh too loudly for the ears they tried to seduce. She watched guards post themselves in pairs but whisper their doubts when no one else could hear. Meilin had no voice in the palace, but she heard everything. And quietly, in her own heart, she understood the world around her more than most. Then one summer, something shifted. A stranger began appearing at the edge of the archive. He did not walk like a servant nor dress like one. Yet he wore no jewels, carried no scrolls of command. His robes were black, unmarked, the kind worn by men who didn't need to prove themselves. He came at odd times, never announced, always alone. He would sit near the far wall saying nothing, watching. At first, Meilin ignored him. She assumed he was a guest, perhaps lost or curious, soon to forget her. But he returned, again and again, never speaking, never interrupting, only watching. There was something different in the way he observed her. Not with hunger, not with disdain, but with a calm patience that unsettled her more than anything else. It was as if he was searching for something, and didn't mind waiting. Meilin kept her eyes on her work, but her thoughts drifted more and more toward the presence of the man who chose silence as his greeting. He did not ask her name, and yet he learned it. He did not compliment her face, and yet he returned for her company. She began to feel the shape of his gaze even when he wasn't there. She would catch herself preparing the scroll table more carefully, smoothing her robe more often, even brushing her hair at night with a thought she had not allowed before. What if someone saw me and did not turn away? It was a dangerous hope, one she had never let grow. But it was there now, soft as breath, quiet as a thread in the dark. The other girls in the palace whispered about someone. A son of the emperor, it was said. One who had returned after years away, changed and unreadable. Some called him proud, others broken. No one agreed on what he wanted, only that he moved through the palace like a shadow with a name. Meilin wondered if the man in black robes belonged to those whispers. She didn't ask, and he didn't tell. But the space between them began to change. The silence they shared turned into something else, something gentler, something that felt like being seen and not judged. In the stillness of the archive, where nothing ever changed, something had begun. Something quiet, something slow. And Meilin, the girl who had no beauty to boast, found herself caught in the eyes of someone who saw what no mirror ever had. In the palace, everything was designed to impress. The gold, the performances, the smiles that held knives behind them. Even silence had a purpose. Calculated pauses, rehearsed glances, strategic absence. But the silence that grew between Meilin and the man who came to sit beside her was of a different kind. It was not performative. It was not heavy. It was ill. In that silence, she continued her work. Her brush moved with care across parchment, the scent of dried ink and old paper settling into the folds of her robe. Some days she copied records of grain shipments or military supply lists. Other times she was given ancient poems no one read anymore. But no matter the task, he returned. He never announced his presence. He never asked permission to sit. Yet, he was always there before she realized she wanted him to be. Time shifted when he entered the room. The hours passed more gently. The sounds of the world outside the archive blurred, softened, disappeared. And though she never said it out loud, she began to wait for him. There were moments when she would glance up and find his eyes already on her. Not with desire and not with pity, but with interest, as if she were a puzzle or a melody or something valuable that didn't know it had worth. It confused her at first. She had grown used to being unseen, used to avoiding mirrors because they served no purpose. But now, something within her stirred when she felt his gaze. Not pride, not vanity. Something deeper. The quiet ache of being noticed by someone who expected nothing in return. One day, he reached for a scroll she had just finished, and as he did, their hands brushed. It was a simple thing, an accidental contact, but Meilin's breath caught. His touch was steady, light but present, like the first breeze after a long winter. She pulled her hand away quickly, returning to her writing, but her pulse would not settle for hours. And when she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, it was not the records of the empire that filled her thoughts. It was the warmth of his fingertips against hers, and the question that had slowly begun to grow in her chest. Who was this man? And why, in a place where no one had ever looked twice at her, did he return? Only to see her. She never asked. His name. It no longer mattered. He was no longer a stranger, he was the shadow that stayed. The breath in the corner of the room. The presence that made her feel like more than ink and silence. As the weeks passed, something unspoken began to blossom between them. Not a romance built on stolen kisses or sweet words. Nothing loud, nothing fast. It was in the way he paused near her chair before sitting. The way she set out an extra brush without thinking. The way neither of them needed to speak to feel full in the presence of the other. It was as if a thread had formed. Invisible, but strong, tying her quiet soul to his watchful one. And she began to realize that something was changing inside her. Something hopeful. Something dangerous, because in the palace, nothing good stayed secret for long. And Meilin, the quiet girl with no beauty to boast, had begun to shine softly in the eyes of someone who wasn't supposed to see her at all. One morning, the man did not come. The sun climbed slowly over the palace walls. The ink in Meilin's pot thickened with time. Her brush moved, but her mind wandered. Her hand paused more than once, hovering above a character that refused to settle on the page. She waited until the shadows on the stone floor had shifted twice. Still, he did not arrive. It surprised her how quickly the stillness around her turned sharp. The quiet she once loved now felt too deep, too wide. The room, once her retreat, had become a space she only liked because he had filled it. That day passed like a cart stuck in the mud, slow, dragging, silent. The next day he didn't come either, or the one after that. It should have meant nothing. He was not hers. No promise had been made, no names had been exchanged, and yet the ache of absence clung to her like damp air. She told herself she was foolish, that she had let her imagination grow wild like vines without trimming, that she had believed for a moment that someone like him could really choose someone like her. But even as she told herself this, she still looked toward the doorway at every sound, still prepared a second brush without thinking, still left space beside her where he used to sit. On the fourth day, he returned. He entered as he always had, without a sound, without permission, like smoke that slips under a door. But Meilin knew the moment he stepped inside. She did not turn to look. She did not greet him. She simply kept writing, but her fingers trembled, ever so slightly, as they touched the paper. He said nothing. He sat beside her as he always did, and the silence between them filled with questions she would not ask and answers he was not ready to give. Only when the sun had nearly disappeared beyond the walls did she finally look at him. His face was the same, but something in his eyes had changed. They were darker now, not with anger, but with burden, like someone who had seen too much in too short a time. He looked back at her not with apology but with gravity, and though no words passed between them, she understood. Whatever kept him away had not been his choice, and whatever pulled him from the world of noble titles and court commands had led him back to her. From that day forward he came every evening, never at the same time, never with ceremony. He would sit beside her in silence, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. They no longer tried to fill the space with questions. There was comfort in that, a kind of closeness that required no explanation. But even without speaking, Meilin knew what was happening. The bond between them was no longer a secret she held inside her chest. It had become a presence, a quiet flame that warmed the space between their chairs. It changed how she walked through the palace. It changed how she heard her own name, not because anyone else had begun to notice her, but because someone already had. Soon, the other girls began to whisper. They noticed the way she smiled more softly, the way she hummed to herself when she thought no one was listening. They saw no jewels on her wrists, no new silk in her wardrobe, but they saw a glow, faint but undeniable, as if her soul had been lit from within. And in the halls of the imperial court, nothing caused more suspicion than a woman who smiled, for no reason. It was inevitable. The moment a servant's face changed, someone would notice. And Meilin's had changed, not with paint or powder, not with favor or flattery, but with light, the kind that grows in a person slowly, quietly, when they are seen and not judged, when they are chosen without being asked to prove they are worth choosing. And the palace could not ignore light. It always asked where it came from. Rumors began softly. A girl in the archive was being visited by someone important, a man whose name no one dared speak aloud, a shadow who moved through the emperor's court like a ghost wearing a crown. No one knew for sure. No one saw him clearly, but everyone felt the air shift when he passed. And now, they said, he passed through the archives too often. Meilin heard the whispers. She didn't respond to them. She continued her work. She bowed when spoken to. She kept her eyes low. But in her heart, something had changed. And the more she tried to fold it away, the more it pushed against her ribs like a heartbeat with its own will. She had once believed her face would never be remembered. Now, someone remembered it every day. One evening, as she was finishing her work, he arrived later than usual. His steps were slower. His robe was dusted with travel. And though he didn't speak, Meilin could feel it in the air. Something had shifted again. He sat beside her without ceremony. But this time he didn't watch her work. He watched her hands, her fingers delicate and stained with ink, her wrists bare but steady, the way her body curved slightly toward her scroll, like someone bowing, not out of fear but out of habit. And in that silence, Meilin felt the weight of his gaze in a different way, not as a question, but as a realization. Later that night, as she prepared to return to her quarters, she found something tucked beneath her brush case. It was a ribbon, deep blue, simple silk, no gold, no embroidery, just cloth. But it was the color of winter skies and deep water, the same color as the mark he often wore at the edge of his sleeve. No message came with it, no name, but she knew. It was not a gift to make her more beautiful. It was a symbol, a sign. She was already enough to be seen. She didn't wear it the next day or the day after. It stayed in her sleeve close to her skin, waiting, because Meilin had never received anything so personal. Not a thing meant to impress a crowd, not a prize to show off, but something that whispered, "You are already mine," whether or not you know it yet. And for a girl who had grown up with silence, that whisper was louder than anything she had ever heard. Outside the archives, the court began to shift. An emperor grew older. Sons positioned themselves like pieces on a board. Alliances twisted like vines in wind. But Meilin continued her work. And the man who now lingered by her side watched all of it with quiet eyes. Eyes that had once looked across battlefields and now rested on the movements of a single woman's brush. He had seen beauty sharpened by ambition, faces painted to seduce, words woven to manipulate. But here he found peace not in the shine of her skin, not in the shape of her lips, but in the stillness of her presence, in the honesty of her silence, in the quiet way she never tried to win him. And somehow, because of that, had. In the palace, it is dangerous to be noticed by the wrong eyes, but sometimes it is even more dangerous to be seen by the right ones. Meilin, who had lived her life beneath the gaze of others without ever catching it, now found herself standing in a light she had not asked for. The man in black, whose name she still did not speak aloud, came to her often now. His presence, once rare and curious, had become regular, familiar, constant. He did not bring her riches or promises. He brought his presence. And in a world like theirs, that was the most generous gift a man like him could offer. She never asked what he did outside the walls of the archive, but she knew. There were days when his robes smelled of wind and fire, when his eyes were heavy from choices no one else wanted to make, when his hands rested too still in his lap, as though holding on to something invisible. He was not just a man of shadows, he was a man of burdens. But with her, he let them rest, even if only for a moment. And so Meilin did not press. She did not beg to be part of his secrets. She simply gave him silence to breathe in, and perhaps that was why he kept returning. But rumors grew, as they always do. A girl in the archives with no family name and no remarkable face had caught the attention of someone powerful. It was unthinkable, unacceptable. The court did not tolerate mismatched stories, and Meilin's story in their eyes did not match his. One morning, she was called to the Eastern Wing, a rare event. She had never been summoned before, not in all her years within the palace walls. Her steps were careful as she made her way down the long marble corridors, her heart louder than her footsteps. In a quiet chamber decorated with silk and silver, she stood alone before a woman in gold. A noble lady, sharp eyes, soft smile, dangerous in every way a woman could be. The lady asked her name, her duty, her background. She asked nothing directly about the man in black, but every word she spoke wrapped tighter around the truth. There were no accusations, only reminders of Meilin's place, of the silence she was expected to keep, of the face she did not have. She left the chamber with her hands steady and her eyes calm, but inside, something cracked. Because Meilin had never been ambitious. She had never chased a future filled with titles or attention. All she had ever wanted was a life of quiet usefulness, a corner of the world where she could be small and safe and real. But now, her heart no longer wanted silence. It wanted him. And that was dangerous. That night she did not expect him to come, but he did. He entered the archive just as she was blowing out the last lantern. His robe was travel-worn again, dust clinging to the hem. And yet when his eyes met hers, it was as if the world outside fell away. He sat beside her, as he always did. But this time the silence between them was heavier, different, and Meilin, the girl who had never asked for anything, finally allowed herself to speak, not with words, but with presence. She turned to him. She looked him in the eye, and for the first time her gaze did not lower, not even once. Whatever passed between them in that silence, it stayed there. But from that night on, he never called her small again. He never treated her like someone who should not have been seen. He treated her like someone who had always been there, waiting for the world to finally recognize what he had seen from the beginning. Seasons in the palace changed like the shifting weight of silk. One morning, the air was thick with jasmine. By evening, it carried the edge of coming frost. Life went on, but Meilin felt the rhythm of it differently now. She was no longer just the girl in the corner of the archive. She was something more, Not to the court, not to the world, but to him. And in her quiet heart, that was everything. He began to appear not just in the evening, but earlier, and sometimes in places she didn't expect. Once she passed through the garden on her way back from the herbal storeroom and saw him standing beneath the plum trees, watching the petals fall. He said nothing. Neither did she. But in that silence, something sacred settled between them. Not everything had to be spoken. Some bonds were written in how a person stayed, even when the world asked them to go. The noblewoman who had summoned Meilin never called again. Perhaps she understood that warning wouldn't be enough. Or perhaps she, too, recognized something impossible to uproot. A love that had taken root in stillness, watered by attention, and grown into something the rules of the palace could not untangle. One day a storm came. It arrived with wind that howled through the wooden beams, shaking windows and scattering petals from the trees. Meilin remained in the archive, lighting her lantern early. As the rain hit the tiled roof, she felt something else build, a tension she couldn't name. He arrived near dusk, soaked through his robes. His hair was tied tightly, but rain still clung to his shoulders. He didn't sit right away. He walked to the far wall, staring at the shelves of history, then turned slowly toward her. She didn't speak. Not because she didn't want to, but because she knew he needed silence more than words. When he finally moved to sit beside her, his hands rested heavy on his knees. He looked like a man who had fought a battle no one had seen. And perhaps he had. She did not reach for him. She only remained close, her breath steady, her presence quiet but unwavering. And that, more than anything, held him together. He told her nothing about what had happened that day. He did not share what decision he had been forced to make, or what name he might have had to betray to protect what mattered. But he stayed until the storm passed, and when he finally stood, his hand brushed her shoulder. Not as a command, not as a plea, but as a thank you. In the days that followed, Meilin noticed more guards near the archive, more glances in her direction, more absence in his eyes, even when he was sitting beside her. Something in the court was shifting again, and this time it would reach them both. Late one evening, when all the scrolls were stacked and the doors had been closed, he remained behind. They sat near the central table, where the candles burned low. The flame flickered between them, painting shadows on the walls. He spoke only once. His voice was low, steady. He told her that there might come a day when he would not return, not because he had chosen to leave, but because the world might pull him away. And when that day came, she was not to search for him. She was not to wait by the door or wander the gardens hoping for a glimpse. She was to live, to write, to be whole, even without his gaze holding her in place. Meilin did not answer. She simply nodded as if she already knew. Because deep inside, she understood that love was not always about staying. Sometimes it was about setting someone free and believing they would find their way back, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He disappeared for 7 days. No word, no message. The candle she usually lit on his side of the table remained untouched, its wick short, its wax cold. The archive became too quiet again, like a room holding its breath. Meilin continued to work. She copied names, dates, and broken treaties. Her hand did not tremble, but her chest did. And every night as she folded her robe and laid down in the same small sleeping space, she whispered a name she had never dared to say aloud. Not his title, not his place. Just him. On the 8th morning before the sun rose, he returned. No servants announced him. No guards followed. He stepped into the archive like he always had, soundless, as though the world had been waiting for him. He stood behind her for a long moment before she dared to turn. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but they met hers with the softness of a man who had crossed through fire and still remembered where to come home. He sat beside her, said nothing at first, and when he finally did speak, his voice was quieter than usual and more certain. He told her that the court had changed, that new names now sat in old chairs, that the emperor had given his blessing to those who chose to live outside the noise. And he had chosen. Not a throne, not a war, but peace, and her. He reached into his robe and handed her a small silk bundle. Inside it was a hairpin, simple, silver, delicately shaped like a brushstroke caught in wind. It was not flashy, it was not expensive, but it was hers. It meant she had been seen, truly seen, not for what she wore or how she looked, but for the way her presence could quiet a storm. She wore it in her hair the next day, not to be noticed, but to remember. And from that day on, she no longer worked in the quietest corner of the archive. Instead, she sat at the table by the garden window, where the light was warmest, where the scent of ink mixed with blossoms, and where her life had quietly begun to bloom. Years later, when new girls arrived in the archive, they sometimes asked about her. Why she didn't wear the same plain robes, why someone with her title walked with such quiet confidence, why a man in dark robes, now rarely seen by anyone, else still came to sit beside her as if he belonged to no one else but her. There was no official answer, but the old scroll keeper who trained the new girls would often smile and say, she had no beauty to boast. But once a man who had seen the entire empire said she was all he saw. The end.
If this story touched your heart, even just a little, don't let it end here. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever been seen for who you truly are? Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that whisper instead of shout. Because sometimes love isn't loud, it's quiet and unforgettable.